All right. Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the show. It is your favorite Jackson, I hope. Uh Today, let's see, who do we have in the live chat? We have Katina. We have Peter, you're over there in the live chat. We got Vesta Freya and Triceratops and Smitty. And joining me here on the show is Peter, my host and co-host.
Who's everywhere. Apparently, I'm
You are
omniscient.
everywhere.
I'm always present somewhere.
You're omnipresent, yeah.
Yes. Dog,
And we
someone's trying to run the show other than me. We can't have that.
And we
Yeah.
also have one of my editors, Nestlig. Welcome back, Nestlig.
Oh, there we go. I was waiting until Peter brought me up. Hello. Good to
I,
be back.
I had to distract this thing first.
He's allegedly here.
Yes.
Nestlig may or may not be here. We're not sure.
Oh, he's
We got
here.
Alex Markel and Jamie E. Welcome. Smitty said, I need to exercise more. I'm approaching omnipresence.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. So let's see. And Icarus.
Yeah. Vesta Freya made a suggestion or two. So I think we should get somewhere in between. So we're covering the Dishonesty Institute.
The Dishonesty Institute, yes.
Yes, we should make that a household name.
Correct. We should start referring to that, get it started, passed around.
Yes.
I have not. I watched the first 60 seconds of this video. I usually don't watch these things all the way through. And Hydroid, because I mean they're usually not worth going through and having to research a bunch of stuff. These guys are pretty typically their arguments are very bad, and so it's pretty easy to just go, oh no, that's wrong for this reason. I had never heard of this book, which I think just came out. I've never heard of the author either, who's a fellow at the Discovery Institute. His name is Robert Shedinger.
It would have been so much. Would have been so much more fun if his name had been Schrodinger.
Schrodinger, yeah.
Yes. We could put him in a box.
That would be ideal. Then
yes.
We would be in a superposition of not knowing whether or not he wrote lies about Darwin.
Exactly.
So, so I looked up this guy. So I guess I did a smidgen of research beforehand. I'd never heard of him, so I was like, okay, well, is he a biologist? Is he a historian? Because this book is supposedly about the book that Darwin did not finish, his big natural selection book that he never finished writing. I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. But I thought, well, maybe he's a historian. Turns out, no, he is not a biologist. He is not a historian. Peter, do you want to take a wild guess as to what his job is?
He's a dentist.
Dentist.
That was good guess. But no, even worse.
Oh, even worse.
I mean, I like dentists. I don't mean to throw shade. I mean, I appreciate dentists.
Orthodontist?
Is he a car mechanic and what was the other occupation of our favorite Oven clone?
You're all guessing in the wrong direction.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. He's a theologian.
He's a theologian. Yes, that makes him
Engineer's
qualified.
A good guess, Icarus.
Yeah, that makes him qualified to talk about every topic. If you're a theologian.
When you said you were thinking in the wrong direction, I was thinking are you referring to gynecology or something?
Nope, no scientific degrees whatsoever. No history. He is theology. And I often think about that quote from Lawrence Krauss that says, if you ask what knowledge has theology contributed to the world, you will be asked, what do you mean by knowledge? So, I'm going to show that. I think yes, you are correct, Alex. So, yeah, he's just a theologian. There's no relevant expertise here. So, with that in mind, I mean, if he were a historian, at least we could say like, at least he should be putting his best foot forward, right? Because I mean, that's the idea with like all the biologists they hire, right? They hire these people who are pretending to be like serious academics, and then they just kind of like ruin everything by being terrible at biology or whatever. Who's your buddy for $10? Thank you. Says, I just here to call Jackson out for his fake science book about rocks when he doesn't even interview a single rock. You are correct. We did not interview one rock for the book. That was a collective decision. We decided the rocks had nothing to say. They weren't even there. So, we didn't interview them.
There we go.
So, yeah. So there's that. Yeah. Thank you, Hoosier Buddy. Which actually, I just sent RJ one of the chapters for Volume 2 just yesterday. And he sent me back a message earlier today saying, are you sure this quote is correct? It's very grammatically incorrect. And I was like, I'm pretty sure I copied it down correctly. So I went back and I looked, and surely enough, I did copy it down correctly. The creationists are just that bad at grammar. So, there's that.
I think I've noticed that doing stuff like this for the past 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's what they have in common with Trump fans. For some reason.
Yeah. And you know what's funny? It was a chapter for one of the Answers books written by David Minton, who has passed, if you guys aren't aware. Minton passed. He was very interesting to me because creationists really love talking about Alan Fiducia, the paleontologist who argues that birds aren't dinosaurs. He's one of like very few people in the field nowadays who argue that. But creationists really like citing Fiducia because they're like, oh, he says it's not a bird, so it's not a bird. Or sorry, it's not a dinosaur, so it's not a dinosaur. However,
yeah.
Well, so Fiducia goes further though, because that's not the end. That's not the end of his hot takes. His hot take goes further to not only is Archaeopteryx not a dinosaur, but Velociraptor is not a dinosaur. Velociraptor is a bird that looks like a dinosaur. Same with
I also believe oviraptors and
yep. Mm-hmm. And all dromaeosaurs, oviraptorosaurs, troodontids, they're all birds.
Yeah. They are all Manoraptors, at least. So,
yeah, and I think there was an AIG video recently that was like all it was even greater than like Maniraptora in a video recently. They were like, if it has feathers, it's a bird, which is also a Fiducia argument. However, Therizinosaurs have feathers. There are Tyrannosaurs with feathers. Dilong and Eutyrannus, both from China, they both had feathers. What was it? Bpiosaurus, which is a Therizinosaur, has feathers.
And depending on how far you are willing to go down, like even Psittacosaurus also had like probably related to feathers, but of course that's less certain. But I would bet it's probably related to feathers. These structures.
Even pterosaurs had the little pycnofibers, which like the odds that those are like totally developmentally different from feathers are pretty low, I would say, because when you look or when you compare the little fibrous, the keratinous fibers of these feathers or whatever you want to call them, proto-feathers of like Psittacosaurus and pterosaurs to the like proto-feathers of like Sinornithosaurus, they look really, really similar. And in fact, feather ontogeny goes through a stage that looks a lot like those little proto-feathers that pterosaurs and ornithischians sported. So I don't know. Seems It seems like there was some sort of keratinous filament that, basal like Dinosauria sported that then got passed down. So in both. Of course, sauropods didn't need them because they were so big that they would have done nothing in terms of of regulating their body temperature. Anyways, I'm sorry, Ness, I cut you off.
Oh no worries. It reminded me of like one of the things we discussed in the like the evolution of body plans. Like one of the things we discussed is the homeopathic mutations, where, for example, you have a change in one body part to a different body part. Like one famous example is in the fruit flies. You have the antenna that have been transformed into like walking legs, basically. And the same thing they did, I believe, in crocodilians. Like they changed the scutes to.
It's the walking legs became antennas.
No, all the way around. I think the antenna became like they grow walking legs in place of.
Oh, you mean like the antennapedia
yes,
mutation? Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yes,
I thought you meant like where did the antennas come from? My bad, I misunderstood.
Oh no worries. But I believe they also did something similar with like crocodilian scutes, where they expressed like a gene that's involved in feather development, and then the crocodilian expressed a feather filament or something similar during embryonic development as well.
Yeah, that was super cool. The feathered crocodile. Yeah, it was super cool.
And I believe that there are maybe I've seen some, but maybe it's not prevalent. There are some who actually argue that like the filaments even go back all the way to the base of Archosauria, and then the crocodilians just lost that filamentous structure and they just became scutes. And like it's maybe one possibility, but I don't see much strength to that one.
Yeah, I'm sticking with. I'll stick with Ornithodira for now, but until we get better evidence,
unless we see like a very early Pseudosuchian, very well preserved with filamentous structures, then I will change my mind on that one.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I agree with that. Yeah. So hold on. Who's your buddy said my pillow has feathers? Are those birds now? Yes. Correct. Pillows are birds. So but yeah, they have to swallow a very bitter pill. However, and this is very funny because creationists and intelligent design advocates have for the past couple decades now, because remember, all those feathered theropods were found in China in the 1990s. So from the 1990s to like the 2010s, basically, creationists and intelligent design advocates were just categorically denying that these are feathers. Because like dinosaurs can't have feathers. That's not possible. They were created separately. But now the script is flipped.
Collagen fibers.
Right, they're collagen fibers, even though they're poking off in like all these ridiculous angles, and they have a rachis and barbules and and melanosomes, just like collagen fibers. Totally, so true. Anyways, what were their names? Prum and Brush like absolutely destroyed the collagen fiber argument. Anyways, so they had to argue they were collagen fibers up until like very end of like the 2010s, early 2020s, when suddenly the creationists completely reversed their position on at least AIG. AIG is kind of leading the charge on this one in reversing the opinion on actually all the feathered theropods. Those are feathers. They're definitely feathers, but they're birds. They're not dinosaurs. So like it's been so fun to watch in real time the creationists just completely reverse positions on all of this. Like, first deny, and then okay, but they're all birds, and we already, and they're like, I'm sure at some point we'll get to the argument that, oh, well, we always said that they were just birds, like, okay, sure you did.
There was also one example. I don't remember which creationist and which fossil, but there was like one creationist who say, oh, this fossil is 100% ape. And then later, the same creationist pointed to the same fossil as, oh, it's 100% human.
That was Dwayne Gish with the Homo erectus skull cap. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, because it's got like the brow ridge and like kind of the skull or the like sort of the back of the skull. And yeah, it was Dwayne Gish who said both on 2 separate occasions, the same fossil. Yeah, which is great. Great stuff. Great stuff.
It doesn't matter which ones you pick, as long as not an intermediate. That's the only consistency. As long as there is no admission of intermediates.
Alex Markel says, but didn't you know birds aren't real? Just ignore those things at the pet store that look like them. Yes, they're actually you've seen The Incredibles, right? You know, the yes. little bird on the island is like, voice key incorrect. You know, that's what birds are. All birds are like that. Most of them just have that little setting turned off. It's true.
Well, I've heard the case. I've heard the case that birds are actually drones, and that the famous lockdown we had a couple of years ago.
Yes,
that was so they could replace the batteries in all the drones.
Right. We wouldn't notice.
That was right. Was that? Yeah. Because obviously
makes sense.
Yes.
I mean, no one could go outside. Yeah, you couldn't see. You know what I didn't see? Any birds. I saw no birds. Not a single one. So.
No.
So you've like one bird, the lyre bird, I believe it's called. It can mimic like these mechanical noises, and then the people like, yeah, there it is. See, it malfunctions.
Yes. Yes, they're great in mimicking the camera sound, where it repeats the camera shutter and the
magpies
automated...
can do that too, can't they?
Yeah, but so lyre birds can do, I think, the most amount of sounds, and they will just pick it up and keep repeating it wherever they go. So,
because I think is it magpies that like they can like mimic human speech? Is that the magpie?
I don't know, but like I've heard about crows mimicking.
Oh, hold on. Bird mimics woman's voice. What bird was that? Nope, it's not a budgie.
I know
starling. It was a starling. That's what it was.
Starling. Okay.
Yeah, because there's a video and she's like, "Who's a good bird?" And then it goes, "Who's a good bird?" Like it's eerie. It is eerie. Anyway, all right. Are we ready to jump right into this video?
Yes. Shall we start? Shall we start with the ominous music, because that's always cool to start.
ID the Future, a podcast about evolution and intelligent design.
All right.
Welcome.
Just for the car fanatics, that actually was true, because the ID was a famous Citroen which came on the market as the DS in, I think it was 59. And it was the future. It was far ahead of its time. So that's the part they're right about. And then they start talking about nature and get everything wrong.
Welcome to ID the Future. I'm your host, Andrew McDermott. Today, I'd like to read for you an exclusive excerpt from Dr. Robert Schedinger's new book, Darwin's Bluff, The Mystery of the Book Darwin Never Finished, now available from Discovery Institute Press. Darwin freely admitted that solid empirical evidence was largely absent from the origin of species, and he promised a sequel that would supply the missing evidence and expand on his mere abstract of a theory.
Actually, pause for a moment.
He penned a...
So, for one thing, there is empirical evidence. There are like literal experiments that Darwin did that he records in Origin of Species. I actually have a book over on my shelf. It's called Darwin's Backyard. That's just about experiments Darwin did relating to various subjects.
Mostly on barnacles.
Yeah, a lot of stuff on barnacles and earthworms, and plants and stuff. But like Darwin literally wrote about an experiment he did with submerging seeds in salt water and then like waiting for a while and then seeing how many of them grew after like a certain number of days, because he calculated like, okay, if it takes this long for like, say a coconut, for instance, or something to travel across a current from one island to another, well, could it actually survive that? If it takes 10 days for this coconut to sit in the salt water and then wash up on the shore, well, would that work? Or would it just die? Would it desiccate and die? And he tried that with a bunch of different seeds and it worked. They actually survived the salt water. Some of them did, and they were able to be planted afterwards, which demonstrated like that things can be transported across the ocean even if they're not marine, right? So there is empirical evidence, because you can still get origin of species. So there's empirical evidence in the book. So to say that like it's largely absent, like I guess that's in a manner of speaking sort of true. Like you can't really do empirical evidence, or I mean, like you can't do like an experiment, on the fossil record. At least not in Darwin's day, you really couldn't. And I mean, a lot of the stuff on biogeography was like inferring natural selection from looking at like their current distribution, right? So in a manner of speaking, I guess that's kind of true about some parts, but like it's not always true. I mean, chapter 1 of Origin is about artificial selection. Darwin took up pigeon breeding to demonstrate the power of artificial selection. So that's also an experiment.
It's also like paleontology was still a very young field in this time. Like it's like even in the names of the like in his day, the recent fossil names are like, oh, Megatherium, oh, big beast, Megalosaurus, big lizard. those are the names that they used back then.
Right. Yeah, there were like a handful of dinosaurs, because the word Dinosauria was invented in 1842, which is only 17 years before Origin of Species was published. So yeah, like the very concept of dinosaurs was in its infancy, So yeah, so it seems like the way that they're kind of pitching this just at the outset is like, it's like it's sort of true, but like it kind of depends. But anyway,
good deal of that sequel, 300,000 words to be exact, but he never finished it or chose to publish it. Why not? In a fresh and engrossing piece of historical detective work, Dr. Schettinger provides evidence that Darwin's big book, begun in earnest, devolved into a bluff. To start things off, I want to share a few of the endorsements of Darwin's bluff.
Can you pause for a moment?
After all, that's often the first thing you see.
Sorry, I keep having you pause. It is my understanding that the big book of about natural selection that Darwin wrote he started writing it before he wrote Origin, and then he got a letter from Alfred Russel Wallace, who was in Malaysia at the time, and Alfred Russel Wallace was like, "Hey, I know you're a big naturalist. Would you be okay with like looking over my finds based on about regarding biogeography and stuff here in Malaysia?" And the ideas that Wallace presented were like natural selection, but he hit upon it totally independently. And Darwin was like, "Oh no, I'm about to get scooped on this idea I've been working on for like 30 years, or well, 20 years." And so Darwin kind of put the big book aside and hastily wrote Origin, which was then published in 1859. Actually, well, there was first a joint paper that like Wallace and Darwin contributed to, if I remember correctly, and that was read at the Royal Society, and then Darwin put together Origin of Species. And so that kind of happened. So then like he didn't really, as I understand it, he like kind of didn't need to write the big natural selection book after that, because he had his overall thoughts drawn out. And then of course he expanded many of his arguments into subsequent books, right? Because for instance, chapter 1 of Origin of Species, as we said, is on artificial selection. He wrote like a few more editions of variation under domestication. So he wrote like several more books just about artificial selection. Where he talks about like sexual selection, because he kind of briefly mentions it in Origin. He wrote Descent of Man, in which he expands his arguments on human evolution and also brings in sexual selection and makes it wanted to expand all that more. RJ says Wallace wanted Darwin, whom he met occasionally, to forward his manuscript to Lyell for review. Okay, that's what it was. Okay. Thank you, RJ. And so there was that. Darwin wrote kind of about coevolution in Origin of Species, so he expanded that into the on the fertilization of orchids, which is about the coevolution between like butterflies and moths and orchids and lots of other stuff. So like I don't know, to say that like, oh, Darwin just kind of dropped it. It was just a bluff. Like, huh? Because Darwin also did several more editions. He wrote like 6 more editions or 5 more editions, 6 in total, of Origin of Species. So I don't know. It just seems really weird to me to be like, well, the big book was just a bluff. He like never wrote about evolution again. It's like, no, that's not what happened. He continued writing about evolution until he died in 1882, I think. He wrote the book on like the action of worms like a year before he died or something like that. It was like really close to his death. So I don't know. What do I know? Anyway. Do you have anything you want to add, Nestle?
I think you covered it pretty well. Yeah.
Okay. All right, we can keep going.
In a book when you pick it up, and I find that those are helpful in framing the book and capturing the essence of it. Here's what paleoentomologist Gunter Beckley said about it.
Lol.
Beckley is
LMAO.
former curator of amber and fossil insects in the Department of Paleontology at the State Museum of Natural History in Stuttgart, Germany. He's a senior fellow with Discovery Institute's Center for Science and Culture. Beckley says, Darwin's Bluff particularly resonates with me. In 2009, as a card-carrying Darwinist serving as a fossil curator in one of Germany's natural history museums, I mounted an exhibit showing Darwin's famous work outweighing the works of his leading modern detractors. To prepare for hard questions from reporters, I decided to give the naysayer books a quick read, books I had been assured were all froth and foolishness. I soon discovered that I had been misled. The arguments in those pages were neither shallow nor illogical. Instead, I came to see that it was actually modern Darwinism that rested on a carefully constructed bluff. Robert Schettinger's latest book shows that the bluffing has a long pedigree, stretching...
So pause. So if you guys are not familiar with Gunter Beckley, we wrote, we co-authored a couple of Professor Dave scripts on Gunter. And he is indeed a paleoentomologist. Very sadly, I came across some of his work while I was doing research for my thesis. So yes, he does have actual papers. He has written perfectly.
Those were published like before he went to the DI, right?
I don't remember. I don't know if he's not. I don't know if he still does paleoentomology work, or if like he doesn't anymore because he gets paid way more to just lie. I don't know. I don't know. But he does lie about evolution. He uses his real background as a paleoentomologist and like invert paleontologist to lie about the Cambrian and Precambrian. So in the videos that we did for Professor Dave, we go through the innumerable lies that Beckley tells about basically every organism in the Precambrian, like everything that is almost certainly an animal. He argues very strongly, like, oh, it's not an animal, or oh, we can't tell, we don't know for sure. It's like, no, we can be pretty rest assured it's an animal. And so like one of my favorites is like there's one very easy like outright lie that that Beckley gets caught in, and that's Beckley says he proposes that Icaria wariutia is not in fact an animal, but is a protist. Now, Icaria wariutia is a late Ediacaran animal. It's a stem bilaterian, and it died in its tracks, which are called morticnia. Literally
these tracks have been known for a while, and then Icaria was described fairly recently, I believe. Yeah,
it was like 2016 or something like that. Yeah, it was pretty recent. So Icaria was found in these tracks that had been known about, which were called helminthoid ignites. So we'd known about these for a long time, and pretty much none of the paleontologists who study like Ediacaran trace fossils thought that they were protists, and they even dispelled this again in the paper on Icaria by saying these tracks don't match any tracks we know from protists, like a rolling foraminifera. Beckley, and they even cite a paper. It's a 2015 paper. I don't remember who the authors were, but they cited a 2015 paper, and they said, here's a paper on rolling trackways in some foraminifera, and you can see how they are in fact very different from the trackways of Icaria. And Beckley says, I personally propose that Icaria is a protist, and he cites that paper, that 2015 paper, that the authors of the Icaria paper said the trackways don't match this. So that's called lying. That's plagiarism, essentially. You are taking credit for someone else's work. So, not good at all, actually. Yeah.
Also,
if you guys aren't aware of how bad plagiarism is, there's a 4-hour video by H Bomber Guy on it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No worries. I like when I heard the guy saying that Beckley said like, "Oh, this book, this Darwin's Bluff book, really resonated with me." Well, that's called confirmation bias.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Beckley likes to tell that story. Whether or not it's true, I don't know, and I guess it really doesn't matter. But Beckley no longer works for that museum. I don't know if it's because he just gets paid more to lie and that's easier. He is a really weird, like, quantum religion nut kind of guy. If you go to his blog, you can read all about his like weird,
like a Deepak Chopra.
Yeah, his
stuff?
weird Deepak Chopra wooism sort of stuff. It's very odd. Like it's unintelligible basically. So I don't know. I don't know if that was pre or post intelligent design, but whatever. Either way, he's a nut. So, and we talk many ways how we know he's a nut. So go watch Professor Dave's videos if you want more evidence. So, I think we can keep going.
Back to the master of Downhouse himself. What emerges from Schettinger's deep dive into Darwin's private writings is a picture of a man racked by doubts and insecurities about his evolutionary theory, but also a man not above a good bluff, one he sold so artfully that he may even have persuaded himself. Here's another endorsement, this time from Neil Thomas, Reader Emeritus in Modern European Languages at Durham University, and author of the book Taking Leave of Darwin, a long-time agnostic.
Wait, who is it? What was the name of this person?
I didn't catch it. Want me to go back?
Can we go back slightly? I'm sorry, I didn't. It's like 20 seconds maybe.
He sold so artfully that he may even have persuaded himself. Here's another endorsement, this time from Neil Thomas.
Neil Thomas? I don't know who that is. Yeah, I don't. Let me look, because I'm not
also familiar with him.
Neil Thomas, Discovery Institute. Taking Leave of Darwin. Retired British humanities professor and lifelong rationalist. Neil Thomas. Okay, so university. Okay, so is he just like an English professor, I guess, or something? That's it? Okay. Okay, whatever. European languages. Okay. Cool. Oh, Savage Perpetual Motion Lungs Cobra for $2 says it's weird how many religious nuts the DI has. Yeah, it's almost like there's a like some sort of crossover between being a weird religious nut and working at like the Discovery Institute or something. Very odd. I wonder if anyone has like investigated this or something like that. I don't know. Yeah, between ID and YC is basically a circle. Well, I don't really. I kind of dispute that. So there are ID people who are old Earthers, like Stephen Meyer, Michael Behe. They are old Earthers. Fazal Rana, he's another one. Hugh Ross. So I wouldn't say it is a circle, but there is a very large degree of overlap. Very large degree. You have people like Jonathan Wells, who we're not really sure what he is. Like, because all of his arguments are not just like, it's not just ID, and it's not even just like young Earth creationist. He argues as though like he's a young Earth creationist in like the mid 1800s. Because he writes like, oh, we don't have any evidence that we've ever seen speciation, or there's no evidence of natural selection. So it's like,
the pepper moths also.
Yeah, it's like, are you aware of what century you're in, my dude? You're a little late to the party. So yeah, so you have ID kind of runs a lot of different ideologies, everything from like YEC to like old Earth creationism. You can kind of get YEC in a lot, or sorry, ID in a lot of different ways. So, because I mean, ID literally only says at its core that there was some form of design in nature from an intelligent source, and that's a lot of things. That's a lot of different positions. So, anyway, technically, ancient alien people who think human evolution was guided are intelligent design, says Smitty. Yes, there's one guy who's on Twitter who claims he's agnostic to what the designer is. He's like, oh, it could be aliens. Yeah, okay, sure. I believe you when you say that. Anyways. Anyway, sorry. Okay. We can keep going. Neil Thomas, he's a European language professor.
Reader Emeritus in Modern European Languages at Durham University, and author of the book Taking Leave of Darwin, a long-time agnostic discovers the case for design. Thomas writes this: stung by early reviewers' resistance to many unsubstantiated conjectures in which his Origin of Species abounds, Charles Darwin announced he would bring out a more detailed sequel to quell the opposition of skeptics. Robert Shedinger shows that this promise was essentially a bluff, since the promised book on natural selection...
Here, pause. Mr. Cliffboard20 says, where do I get my Darwinist card from? I want one. Good question. I also don't have a Darwinist card. I have also not been getting my George Soros checks. I have been waiting diligently. I have been spreading his message of evolution and atheism for like 8 years now, and I have not had one Soros check. I'm very disappointed. 0 out of 10 stars. So I'm going to get on that.
You need to work a little bit harder.
Apparently. Goodness gracious. I have to keep going to work or whatever, to pay for everything. It's kind of lame, not going to lie. I would like my Soros check now. I feel like I've done a lot of good work. Okay, we can keep going.
Never appeared. In the early 1860s, Darwin instead devoted his energies to a botanical study of orchids. He nevertheless hoped that by describing the exquisite contrivances found in orchids, his readers would see in these adaptations the power of natural selection at work.
I wonder if they did.
Precisely the opposite impression was created. Expressing a common sentiment in a review of the volume, an anonymous reviewer wrote in 1862, "The notion of the origin of species by natural selection we continue to regard as an ingenious mistake." Worse, Darwin's Orchids volume was favorably compared with the Bridgewater Treatises in its supposed contribution to Christian apologetics.
Here,
contextualizing Darwin's own...
Let's pause, because I had this argument on Darwin Day, or right after Darwin Day, something like that, because creationists want to pretend that history isn't real, that we can't use this thing called Google and do a little bit of research. Unfortunately for creationists, we can in fact do research. So I'll give you an example. So when he says that, oh, actually the orchid book contributed to Christianity, what he's doing is called, well, let me be fair to him. Maybe there was a review somewhere that compared Darwin's book on orchids to the whatever book he said that was like, oh yes, it's pro-Christianity. I'm sure people said that about Origin of Species too. After all, there were a lot of clergy who were perfectly fine with Origin of Species. So sure, probably there were some people in the clergy or just people in general who wrote reviews of these books and said, yeah, evolution's fine. It just tells me more about the creator. You know what? Cool. Great. Okay. That's fine. I don't care. However, the creationists hated Darwin's work and they hated the Orchid book because there was a guy named George Campbell, who was the 8th Duke of Argyll. And he wrote about a very specific prediction that Darwin made in... Oh, that's hilarious. Oh, well, I'll get to that in 1 second, RJ. And George Campbell wrote regarding a specific prediction that Darwin made. So Darwin saw this orchid, which is native to Madagascar. It's called Angræcum sesquipedale. Now, Angræcum sesquipedale is unique in that it has 2-foot-long nectaries. Now, Darwin sees this and he thinks, if coevolution is true, if for exaggerated features in a flower to exist, you have to have some animal to cause those exaggerated features, and also there will be exaggerated features in the recipient, or I guess the reciprocal animal, then we should expect to find a lepidopteran who has a 2-foot-long proboscis. And that is what should pollinate Angræcum sesquipedale. Now, George Campbell said no. He said, no, there is no lepidopteran with a 2-foot proboscis. That is a silly conjecture. God just made that orchid just the way it is today. Guys, do you want to guess whether or not we found the moth? Does anybody want to guess? Anyone want to guess if we found? We found it. The moth that has a 2-foot-long proboscis and visits Angræcum sesquipedale is called Xanthopan morgani. Now, some people call it Xanthopan morgani predicta. I think subspecies are dumb, but whatever. Xanthopan morgani. It lives on Madagascar. It is a hawk moth, and it pollinates the orchid. So Darwin was right. Unfortunately, the moth wasn't found until years after he was dead, but he was right. Now, if you tell creationists online that Darwin made a successful prediction, he saw this flower, he predicted the moth was found, they will tell you, 1, it doesn't matter. Anyone could have predicted that. And your response to that should be, no, they didn't. In fact, they argued explicitly against it. Creationists said there was no moth. So do not let them pretend that just anybody could have made that prediction. No, they couldn't have. It took Darwin. RJ also says Schrödinger's reference bibliography is hold your seats a whopping 10 pages long. Yeah, that's kind of pathetic. Unless the book is like itself 10 pages long, even still, that's like 1 reference per page, which is also kind of pathetic. I mean, I'm really not surprised, I guess. He's a theologian, so, Anyway, Nestle, you want to add anything?
It's no. I think you took off everything pretty well, but also one thing to mention about the orchid.
Mm-hmm.
It's the reason why it's so deep is because it basically guarantees that only one or only a few species are able to reach the nectar, which means that the insect that visits you also are more likely to visit other members of your species. They don't wander off to other flowers, for example. So it guarantees cross-pollination like that. That's the idea behind that result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, we can move on.
Okay.
Doubts and insecurities by exhaustively researched reference to his correspondence, Schrödinger opposes many accretions of Darwin hagiography. It would be a sensible step forward, Schrödinger concludes, to take Darwin at his word when he wrote in a letter to Asa Gray in 1857, "I am quite conscious that my speculations run quite beyond the bounds of true science."
Wait,
this book is particularly to be recommended to those...
I know that quote. So that quote was not a reference to Darwin was not saying that like evolution is not science. What he was explaining was the way that science was done in that day, and even the way it usually is nowadays still, is in like the Baconian method, which is you're drawing inference based on experiments. Now Darwin did, as we said earlier, he did do experiments, but you can't really do experiments to show that like evolution happened in deep time. You have to draw inferences based on a series of different data points. So you do induction, but like it's not like you're doing an experiment and then you're just deriving the conclusion from that. You're taking like these circumstantial data points, very strong circumstantial data points, and then you're bringing them together. So in that sense, yes, what Darwin considered science in that time was not exactly what he was proposing. He was proposing an explanatory like framework for how to understand all these different lines of evidence. So there wasn't like a single experiment he could do to vindicate evolution. So, and that quote line gets tossed around all the time by creationists. It's very lame. Anyway, we can keep going.
Was tempted to view Darwin as an unquestionable Victorian sage. Next, I'll read the introduction to Darwin's Bluff, followed by a portion of Chapter 6, where Schettinger shows how Darwin created expectations for the big follow-up book and how his correspondents took him at his word in their anticipation of it. Introduction. Does the world need another book about Charles Darwin? What can anyone say that has not already been said about this seminal figure, considering the wealth of literature written about him? The simple answer is yes, we do need another book about Charles Darwin, for there are aspects of his life and work that have surprisingly continued to evade the attention of his many biographers and interpreters.
I mean,
the very human Charles Darwin has grown into a mythological figure, a paradigmatic example of a true scientist.
Pause for a moment. I think I was also reacting to the
that was pretty funny.
Darwin.
Yeah.
Yes. But like they mentioned like haven't we have enough books on Darwin by now? Well, nowadays the people who write most about Darwin are you people.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, like aside from and isn't that funny that like he says, "Oh, Darwin's biographers have all missed this." Really? You think like the people who spend their whole lives like reading his works and letters and studying his life, like they just missed it? All of them? But you, a theologian with no background in this field, you managed to catch what they all missed.
In all fairness.
The arrogance.
In all fairness, do you know what a theologian is?
What?
It is someone who studies God. So someone who's made a career out of telling people what they missed about God. So it's basically, it comes with the territory to just make shit up and tell people, this is what you missed.
I guess
I wouldn't go that far because like even I think some atheists are also theologians as well. So it's
that's true. Isn't Alex O'Connor?
It's more complex. Theology is more complex than just arguing for God's existence. I would say.
No, it's not arguing.
I feel like that's more.
It's not
that's
arguing.
More like philosophy of religion, isn't it?
Yeah, it's also it's not arguing for God's existence. It is the theology is the study of God, as far as I know, at least that's the definition. Study of God. So not whether or not he exists or not. It's you could be studying God even if you don't believe in him because he's this character in a book. Same way that you could study Voldemort.
Voldemortology.
Voldemortology. Yes.
Savage Perpetual Motion Lungs Cobra for $5 says Darwin is so unquestionable that modern genetics is built on the concept of gemmules. Very true. Very true. And Alex Markel says an actual theologian studies religion. I don't think this theologian does that. I guess it kind of depends, right? I don't know. I guess it kind of depends on like what your speciality is, right?
Whether or not you're a creationist, because didn't you know that Darwinism is a religion?
That's very true.
I
I
mean-
worship at the altar of Darwin every day.
Yes.
We get a tax credit or a tax.
Yeah, we can
We
make
should.
a 501c3 and then get all kinds of tax benefits to.
We
what
we
do
get
we-
to wear like a big gray beard when we get our ID.
Oh,
picture,
I know. I know what we need to do. We need to gather money and build a giant beagle somewhere
Very
in
true.
Kentucky in a
But
park.
not the ship, a dog.
No, the ship with and
No,
then
it's gotta be like a giant.
no, and then we can have a
Giant
zoo
dog.
with finches and all kinds of birds.
Oh.
It'll be cool, Jackson.
We
It'll be
put
cool.
like all the different animals that Darwin talked about in Origin in the zoo. Huh?
Yes.
It's
Okay.
instead of saying, "Oh, they passed away," we say, "Oh, they were naturally selected." Oh, yeah, that's how the religion works. That's how the religion works.
And then we can
they have been naturally selected. Peace be on his name. You know.
then we can have a museum with animatronics. So we can have an actually moving Archaeopteryx and stuff like that. I mean, wouldn't that be cool, Jackson?
That
Wouldn't
would
that
be
be-
something. Yeah,
Yes.
that would certainly be something. Okay.
It also reminds me of it's a very old video that Arnold put out. Like there was a video where he visited the museum in London, and they made a very funny image where they were like kneeling down and worshiping the statue of Darwin and saying like, "Oh, this is what creationists believe atheists do." And then you see Arnold with his friends like bowing down in front of the Darwin statue.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But we could and Jackson, we could sell souvenirs because from the wood we could take the parts that are discarded and sell those and call it beagle barks. I mean, we could be
Camilla just sent me a
millionaires.
text saying a creationist who write about Darwin saying scientists should stop writing about Darwin.
Yeah.
You have become the very thing you swore to destroy. Yeah, very true. Yeah.
You were
Are there
supposed to destroy.
Do what?
Yeah, you were supposed to destroy the dark side, not join them.
Yeah, they're just silly guys. All right, we can keep going.
Without whom nothing in biology would make sense, in the words of Theodosius Dobzhansky. Unfortunately, this mythological figure would be scarcely recognizable to Darwin's own contemporaries. Happily for the present enterprise, the flesh and blood Charles Darwin is considerably more interesting than the two-dimensional Darwin of the hagiographies. The state of his scientific legacy is also more intriguing than those same hagiographies would allow. Intriguing because it is embattled in ways confessed to in some of the peer-reviewed literature and at high-level scientific conferences, but rarely acknowledged beyond those specialized contexts.
Let's pause.
Modern scientific
Let's pause for a moment.
advances and field.
Okay. I'm like, I'm kind of confused here because are they saying like we want to present Darwin as like confused and befuddled, like to the popular audience? Because he wasn't. The things that he was, I don't know if I would say, I'm concerned, I guess. The things that he thought he didn't have like really satisfactory answers to in his own time. You hear nonstop about those from creationists anyways, right? So, Darwin mentions like, oh, we don't know where, all the fossils are below the Silurian. And that's all they talk about. All the creationists say is like, Darwin said he didn't know where the fossils were, and they're still not here, despite all the fossils that we now have. It's like, I don't know. It just that seems really silly to me. But like, it's true that if you study Darwin, then like he's more than just a two-dimensional character, but also his biographers don't present him as a two-dimensional character. Like was it John Van Wy? I think is one of them. I've read some of his works, and I've never seen Darwin presented as a two-dimensional figure by the biographers. I've never seen that. Like, I don't know where.
Except
I don't know. Maybe
except from on this show, when I do that, then we have a two-dimensional Darwin.
Okay, that's fair. I can't argue with that. Yeah. Aside from that, I don't know. It seems to me like the creationists are the ones who always present him as being two-dimensional, right?
I have a question. I have a question though, because what they love to do is discredit Darwin. So what do they expect? That, let's say, we completely discredited everything Darwin ever wrote. What kind of impact would that have on evolution after every discovery we've made since Darwin? I don't think a whole lot.
Yeah. It wouldn't. Yeah, exactly.
So why stick to this one particular person who, for some reason,
well, because he's the prophet of evolution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need a prophet.
Yeah. Savage Perpetual Motion Lungs Cobra's right. This guy just heard the word hagiography for the first time yesterday. Yeah, now it was on his his word of the day. Now he's trying to weave it into every conversation. You know. Yeah, I don't know. This is very odd to me. The idea that everyone just presents Darwin as like an unquestionable prophet of evolution, which again is just the way that creationists present him. It is not the way that evolutionary biologists present him.
No.
They just don't. That's just not a thing that happens.
They love projection.
I would say it's an example of a projection. Like,
yes.
Their position is dogmatic, so our position also has to be dogmatic. Basically, that's how it works.
It's all projection. Yeah. If you're not taught how to think, then this is how you think. Everyone does everything also exactly the same way as you do in church. You listen to the guy in the pulpit, what he says is true, and you don't question it. That's it. And that's just not how science works. You listen to the guy in the pulpit, and then you start to prove him wrong. But that's not allowed in the church.
I also like a DM fragmentary changes ring comment. Hail Darwin, may his finches ever speciate. I don't know, I really like that.
That is pretty good.
Yeah.
That is pretty good. Okay. All right, we can keep going. Well, actually, RJ says Darwin's natural selection book would have just been Origins plus long footnoting, which is why it's described as an abstract. Source documentation was left out overall, except some in later editions. Okay. Okay, cool. All right, we can keep going.
Fields like molecular biology, genomics, epigenetics, paleontology, developmental biology, and more are raising significant questions about the power of the Darwinian mechanism of variation and natural selection to account for the evolutionary history of life on Earth. Some are calling for an extended evolutionary synthesis, while others believe the entire Darwinian edifice needs to be overhauled. It is no longer clear that Darwin can be said to have answered the question of the origin of species. There is thus no reason to begin an investigation into his life and work with the assumption that he did. Let's example of
it's true that Origin of Species really should have been titled like The Origin of Adaptations or something like that, because that's really what it was about. I mean, Darwin had some ideas about how speciation occurs, but not really well fleshed out ideas. So like whether Darwin was kind of like, it could be allopatric or sympatric speciation, but like what are the driving forces behind these sorts of separation? It's really just kind of like Darwin just kind of envisions like natural selection just kind of keeps happening, and this drives populations to become new species. But of course, most of the things, like the concept of reproductive barriers, that didn't come around until the 1900s. So it was quite a while until there were like deep dives by researchers into what exactly drives speciation. That took a long time.
Yeah, I also believe that even Huxley, like Darwin's bulldog, also wasn't convinced about selection being the main driver of speciation, right? Or maybe I'm mistaken that.
I don't know about that one.
Yeah, but I do remember that Huxley also had some disagreements with Darwin as well.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Maybe not on that issue, but if I remember correctly, like he disagreed with him on how species, new species arise. At least I think, yeah.
Yeah, he was. Huxley told Darwin, "Hey, you shouldn't argue that everything is gradualist. You should
That's
allow
also
for."
one thing. Yeah, that's also one thing. Yeah,
it's like you should allow for like species change to. It could also be rapid, and Darwin was like, "Nah, I don't think so." But now we know it's kind of both. It depends. When the guy was mentioning like, "Oh, here's all these new things that we have." Well, yeah, those all came about in the last like within the last century. So, of course, Darwin didn't have access to those things. However, if you actually look at like population genetics work, the fact that epigenetics now exists really hasn't changed population genetic stuff all that much. Like a lot of the foundational work that was laid out in like the 30s still applies. Stuff worked out by like Fisher and or Ronald Fisher, Sewell Wright, JBS Haldane, like a lot of that math still applies today. It hasn't been replaced. You can actually take stuff like the price equation, which Zach Hancock talks about over on his channel, which involves genetic change in populations. Well, you could use genetic change, or you could use epigenetic change that also can be factored into that equation. Like it's not one or the other. Like, okay, you have to just completely throw out everything we knew previously because epigenetics is a thing now. Like, no, that's just not true. You don't have to. And like paleontology just kind of adds further to evolution. I'm not really sure how he thinks that overturns anything. I don't know.
Oh, we only discovered more gaps.
Right. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
All right, we can keep going.
Darwinian mythology has been to downplay the 19th century Englishman's own characterization of the origin of species as a mere abstract of his species theory, a summary lacking much of the facts, evidence, and authorities he promised would follow in a later work. The origin is usually treated as Darwin's magnum opus, a characterization in keeping with Darwinian mythology, but out of step with Darwin's own view of his work. In truth, The Origin of Species was an abstract of a much larger book on species that Darwin was working on, and it was 3/4 complete, before events forced him to put the larger book aside and instead publish a mere abstract of it. Once The Origin was in circulation, Darwin's many correspondents anticipated that he would quickly follow up with the publication of his big book on species so they could better evaluate the argument for natural selection made in The Origin. Indeed, Darwin himself created this expectation, both in The Origin and in his correspondence. Even early reviewers of The Origin noted the lack of empirical evidence for natural selection, but gave Darwin the benefit of the...
So, like, as we said earlier, Darwin continued writing. He added more information to Origin, like, as time went on, because he wrote 5 more editions. He wrote more books on artificial selection. He wrote more, another book on sexual selection. He wrote a book on coevolution, which is all about natural selection. So it's really weird to say like, oh, he just stopped writing about natural selection. No, he didn't. What do you mean? What are you talking about? On the Fertilization of Orchids is about natural selection. It's about the selection between of co-evolving organisms on each other. That's literally all natural selection, and he used that to make accurate predictions about organisms, about their relationships. So like, I don't, this doesn't make any sense. It's just like, oh, Origin was the one and only book Darwin ever wrote. Then he just went home and never said anything ever again. Like what world are you living in? It's like it seems like the guy's just kind of arguing like, oh well, Darwin didn't finish this one specific work, therefore everything he wrote is meaningless, I guess. Like, that's nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Does that it seems like a really crazy argument, but you know, that's the DI for you, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, we can keep going.
Doubt, since the origin was a mere abstract and therefore could not be expected to provide all the evidence. Given the anticipation among Darwin's readers for the big book on species, anticipation that Darwin himself repeatedly stoked, why didn't he publish the big book? This question is rarely asked. A rough, handwritten manuscript of Darwin's big book, titled Natural Selection, survived among his papers and was published by Cambridge University Press in 1975. Yet despite the easy access scholars now have to this work, I bought a copy on Amazon, there has been little detailed engagement with its contents or comparison of this work with its abstracted form in the origin. Such a comparison proves enlightening, for it serves to highlight the secondary nature of the origin as a hastily written abstract rather than a finely honed scientific treatise, thus challenging
Pause. Okay, remember, the reason that he wrote Origin was he was afraid he was about to be scooped by Wallace. That was the reason he wrote it. And he continued writing things about natural selection. Like in Descent of Man, he talks about the natural selection that resulted in our human features and compares us with other apes and shows that we are in fact evolved creatures and we share a common ancestor with them. And orchids or the book on orchids is another example. Like the reason that this book on natural selection, which was published 100 years after he died, doesn't receive as much attention is he didn't publish it. Right? That's the whole point. It's kind of like what was that book? Oh shoot, who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that book.
Well, To Kill a Mockingbird is a really good book. RJ, you probably remember. But Harper Lee, there we go. I think Harper Lee was the author. Anyway, Harper Lee had written another book that, like, she had written another book previously, but it wasn't published. And then it was just published like several years ago. But obviously it didn't receive as much, it didn't receive as much press as yeah, thank you, Jamie. It didn't receive as much press as To Kill a Mockingbird because, well, she didn't publish it. People published it years later. So of course it's not going to receive as much press. Maybe, for academic, maybe out of academic interest, people will read Darwin's Natural Selection book and they'll say, okay, here, this is cool. Here's all the comparisons between the Natural Selection book and Origin of Species. But like outside of that, I don't really know what the point is. I don't see what the point would be of that. I don't know. Am I crazy, Nestle? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know about that. So sorry, I'm suddenly feeling very tired because it's been a long day today and I cannot stay awake for much longer.
Sorry.
I apologize. Sorry for that.
No, you're fine. I don't know. It seems to me kind of weird that like they're like Schettinger's like, oh, I'm so mad that no one has done, or that this book that was published in the 70s that wasn't completely finished is not as popular as like Darwin's finished work that he got published. I don't know. It just seems like a really weird argument to me. I could be wrong. But anyway. All right, we can keep going.
Iconic status of the Origin as the foundational text of the modern biological sciences. This, of course, may be precisely why the Big Book gets overlooked. Another reason the Big Book has been largely ignored, I hope to show, is that it does not deliver the promised goods. This, I will also argue, is the best explanation for why Darwin never brought the book to print. It wasn't, as one might suppose, that he had made little headway on it and simply lacked the time or energy to produce it. Abstracts are usually distillations of longer works already in existence. So if the origin, as Darwin constantly repeats, is only an abstract, it would suggest the Big Book on Species already existed in some substantial form prior to 1859. And in fact, this was the case. The manuscript contained 9 chapters and was close to 300,000 words in length. It would likely have been around 400,000 words complete. Given that this book was nearly 3/4 complete, why did Darwin never publish it? And why did he instead turn to the study of orchids as a follow-up to the origin? Because, as will become clear, he came to see that it did not answer some key criticisms that the origin had elicited. So he abandoned the project, even as he allowed anticipation of its publication to persist for many years.
Pause for a second. Okay, that is true that that Origin of Species did not answer every response that critics had about natural selection. That's true. Darwin explicitly said, "Hey, I can't go into big detail about this right now, but I will talk about it in another book," which he did. Like he, for instance, said, "Much light will be thrown on the origin of man and his faculties," and then Darwin wrote or Descent of Man. But so one of the things that wasn't sufficiently answered in Origin was like the concept of coevolution. Well, how do we get these relationships between flowers and butterflies? How do those arise via natural selection? Well, Origin of Species didn't really tackle that. So that's fair game to go after. So once he finished Origin of Species, he said, okay, well, I'm going to address this criticism. And he did. And made successful predictions about it. It seems like Schedinger's like, I'm so mad that Darwin moved on to answer another critic or something. Why didn't he just stick with this one thing forever?
I like what Smitty says, because I usually try and use the tactics that creationists use against evolutionists. Smitty said, kind of suspicious. The Book of Mormon isn't as popular as the Bible. What are Christians hiding?
Right.
I mean,
exactly.
That's the sentiment, right? So, yeah, it doesn't work.
To be sure, Darwin's Orchid book, which he called A Flank Movement on the Enemy, did attempt to provide some of the evidence for natural selection missing from the origin. And as it turns out, missing from the Big Book as well. He tried to outflank his opponents by putting before them an entirely new work on the numerous contrivances, Darwin's word, found among orchid flowers to ensure their cross-fertilization by insects. Surely this would impress his readers with the power of natural selection to evolve all these exquisite contrivances. But Darwin's strategy failed. Reviewers of his orchid book read it as providing evidence for natural theology, not natural selection. And surprisingly, even Darwin himself in one place likened his orchid book to the Bridgewater Treatises, a series of writings designed to extol the power of God manifest in nature. Could anything be more ironic than that Charles Darwin...
What is it, Bridgewater? What do you say, Bridgewater Collections? I don't know. I mean, remember, Darwin was an agnostic. Darwin was not an atheist. So it is fine for Darwin to say that you could read his books as evidence for God. He wasn't an atheist. He wasn't anti-religious or anything like that. So, okay. And I don't know. I don't get what's so weird about that.
Yeah, Darwin failed so hard that creationists these days still don't believe him. Only these silly scientists do. That's how hard he failed.
Darwin, the poster child for the triumph of scientific naturalism in biology, actually advanced the cause of natural theology in his day? This is an aspect of his life and work that has been entirely erased.
Then intelligent design people wouldn't be so anti-Darwin. right? Like if Darwin really advanced natural theology, then why are intelligent design proponents hating Darwin so much? Why? Oh, Jamie E provided the link. Thank you, Jamie E. The Bridgewater Treatises. There we go. Thank you. The Bridgewater Treatises are a series of 8 works that are written by leading scientific figures appointed by the President of the Royal Society in fulfillment of a bequest of €8,000 made by Francis Henry Egerton, 8th Earl of Bridgewater, for work on the power, wisdom, and goodness of God as manifested in creation. They made such an impact that Charles Darwin began on the origin of species with a quotation from the Bridgewater Treatise of William Whewell? Okay. Cool.
We will.
Can we also
Right.
also just notice how Jamie E put in a lot of work to make his profile picture match with the brand colors of the show? I just noticed. That's on purpose. That has to be intelligently designed.
Very true.
By the prevailing mythological Darwinian narrative. For all these reasons, a more nuanced assessment of Darwin's evolutionary writings is warranted. In my engagement with Darwin, I will give pride of place to his voluminous correspondence as the evidentiary basis of this more critical portrait of a truly enigmatic Victorian figure. The argument that lies ahead cites more than 250 letters written by and to Darwin up to the year 1863, some never cited in Darwinian biographies. These letters represent Darwin's engagement with more than 70 friends, family members, and scientific correspondence. I've elected to adorn the book with many direct quotations from these letters, since I think it's crucial for readers to hear Darwin's own voice on the page as much as possible to truly encounter the thought patterns and rhetorical style of this fascinating individual. Many of Darwin's biographers take the reverse approach, providing their own paraphrases of Darwin's words, which has the effect of subordinating Darwin to the mythological figure the biography exists to perpetuate.
Of course.
I've also elected, for authenticity's
totally
sake,
fair.
to retain Darwin's spelling and
Yeah, can you pause for a moment? It's like I'm sure every Darwin biographer over the last 100 years has instead put their own flair on Darwin, but not Schrödinger. No, he's the very first non-biographer to write a book about Darwin and just let Darwin speak for himself, just as he is. I'm sure. I'm so positive that's true and accurate and not at all a lie, but whatever. Anyway.
And
Anyways.
we have a super chat from Savage, Perpetual Motion Lungs, Cobra.
Sorry, I was still reading the
said,
thing. I found the source for his insights into Darwin's motives. It's Bro Trust Me 2024 for $5. Very true. Sorry, yeah, I was still reading the link of the Bridgewater treatises. Okay, cool.
punctuation rather than correct them to modern standards. We need to let Darwin speak for himself. It turns out that Darwin, given the opportunity, is quite capable of dismantling his own mythology. Who was the real Charles Darwin? In searching for this more authentic Darwin, we will pay particular attention to the many letters he wrote and received up through the year 1863. Unless otherwise noted, all letters mentioned in this book are taken from Frederick Burkhardt et al., editors, The Correspondence of Charles Darwin, Cambridge University Press.
And when we say we need to read all the letters, it means we need to find as many quotes that we can quote mine from those letters in order to use in a completely different context to pretend that we're right and he's wrong. That's, of course, that's the tactic.
Yes, I am quote mining. To quote Matt Powell.
Yes.
Oh, also, RJ makes a good point. Why print the old natural selection book that didn't address criticisms when he simply responded to the criticisms in subsequent editions of Origin? Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make any sense. No part of this argument makes any sense. Yeah, why didn't Darwin respond to future arguments in his past book? I don't know, because that's how time works, I guess.
Yeah, but see, that's why the Bible is better, Jackson, because it has prophecies. It talks about the future, about things that didn't come to pass and stuff.
That's I just watched the John Oliver episode on Clarence Thomas right before. Oh yeah, bye Nestlig. Have a good evening.
Yes, I apologize. I will talk to you next week. Hopefully, I will have more energy next week. So
that's all right. I understand. Have a good evening.
We will send you a case of Red Bull, Nestlig. That'll help.
I actually hate that shit. It tastes like
We will send you. We will send you.
It's horrible.
I know something better. We will send you Monster Energy instead, because the logo of Monster Energy is actually the sign of the devil. It's 666.
I actually believe energy drinks are like poison. They just kill you slowly over time. Anyway, I will talk to you later.
All right, have a good evening.
Bye, Ness.
Oh shoot, I forgot. Oh yeah, so I would watch the John Oliver episode right before we did this, and Samuel Alito, one of the judges on the Supreme Court, says, well, I didn't report getting like a what do you call it, like a private jet flight, because if I weren't sitting in this seat, it would have been empty. And John Oliver responds, well, yeah, that's how chairs work, So, like, I feel kind of like that with this. Like, yeah, he didn't respond to the future arguments because the book was written in the past, because that's how time works. But anyways, RJ also says, the Bridgewater treatises were a series of pro-God stuff. Darwin may have been comparing some of his structural approach to how those were organized. Yeah, that's definitely possible. Yeah, certainly. Okay, we can keep going.
Easily be located based on the date and addressee of the letter. In addition, an index of letters cited, arranged chronologically, appears in the back matter of the book. Many of these letters are, as of this writing, freely available online at the Darwin Correspondence Project.
Yeah.
Chapter 1 will limn the mythological Darwin found in many of his biographies, show how even mainstream biographies have begun calling that portrait into question, and begin to show how Darwin himself contributed to the mythology. The opening chapter will pay particular attention to one rhetorical technique Darwin employed almost obsessively, involving his health. Chapter 2 considers Darwin as a geologist. Long before he turned to questions about the diversity of living organisms, his main interest was geology. While aboard the Beagle, Darwin read Charles Lyell's Principles of Geology. Lyell had replaced the geological theory of catastrophism with the principle of uniformitarianism. Catastrophism taught that the Earth's geological features resulted from sudden cataclysmic events, like a global flood, while uniformitarianism taught that the Earth's geological features could be explained by slow, gradual change brought about by the more mundane processes of wind and water erosion, earthquakes and volcanic eruptions acting over enormous spans of time. Darwin was convinced by Lyell's theory.
Okay, so yes, that's all true. That's all well and good. We don't adhere to uniformitarianism anymore. We adhere to we geologists adhere to what's called actualism, because it turns out that natural history is kind of a combination of both catastrophism and uniformitarianism. Generally, you have these slow, gradual processes like erosion and whatnot that can change and shape landscapes and features and whatnot. But also sometimes there are really big catastrophic events that happen, like meteors slam into Earth and do quite a bit of damage and shape the landscape, things like that. So that does happen. There are times when you have magmatic provinces which greatly shape entire continents. So it's not just it's either catastrophism or uniformitarianism. Actualism kind of blends the two of them into a more explanatory framework. So, anyway.
Spent much of his time in South America seeking evidence for it.
True.
After the voyage, Darwin continued his interest in geology, developing a theory on the origin of the parallel roads of Glenroy in Scotland, as well as a theory about coral reefs. Why is Darwin's early interest in geology relevant to his more famous biological work? First, because it challenges the commonly accepted notion that the Beagle voyage was absolutely formative for Darwin's species work. And second, because some of Darwin's geological theories turned out to be wrong, shining a light on some of his weaknesses as a scientist.
Here, pause for a second.
Of course, Darwin...
Pause for a second. So, actually, I'm kind of baffled by that statement, series of statements, honestly. The Beagle was absolutely informative. Do you think Darwin really would have come up with all the stuff that he understood about biodiversity if he hadn't traveled the world? Because I certainly don't think so. Like his very first thoughts on like biogeography stemmed from him visiting like the Falkland Islands and the Galapagos Islands, where he saw that with regard to the Falkland Islands, for instance, you had the wara, or the Falkland Islands wolf, that looked slightly different depending on which island it came from. The same is true of the finches and the tortoises, and lots of other things like I think the lava lizards are the same way. It's like, no, it's simply ridiculous to say that it wasn't formative in his development of the theory of evolution. There's a book I have by Adrian Lister. It's Darwin's Fossils. I mentioned it last week. Also very good. Talks about the fossils that Darwin found while he was on the Beagle, which again were immensely important to his formulation of evolution. And of course, well, as the guy asked, why is this important? Why is Darwin's work on geology important? Well, it's important because you apply Darwin's idea of slow, gradual biological change and put that in the context of slow, gradual geological change. And that's where we get like the fossil record. So you can see this gradual change in populations over time, over these deep ages. And I did think it was a little funny when he said, oh, this shows Darwin's the holes in his character as a scientist, because like Darwin, because he mentioned the book on coral reefs that Darwin wrote, and Darwin was right, because we still invoke Darwin's explanation of how coral reefs form today. The leading idea at the time, which was Charles Lyell argued that corals grow on the side of volcanoes as they rise up through the ocean. So they're basically around the ring of the mouth of the volcano as it rises up. Darwin said, I don't think so. I think they're on islands or which are volcanoes, as they sink down. And he was correct. So as the volcano sinks, the corals that are in the photic zone, which is where the light penetrates into the water, at the top of the water column, so the corals grow up there. And as the island continues to sink downward, the corals have to grow continually higher and higher, or the future generations have to grow continually higher and higher to stay in that photic zone where it's just warm enough to grow and it's light enough to grow. And Darwin was so convincing with this explanation that, like I said, we still use it today. And he even convinced Lyell that Lyell's idea was wrong. And Lyell adopted Darwin's idea. So, like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean specifically when you say Darwin was a failure in this regard? Probably in some things he said were wrong about geology. Sure, he said wrong things about biology too. But, like, can we get a specific? Because I'm very curious.
Speaking about
Peter, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, speaking about failures, I recently saw someone interacting with Arn Ra, and I have to ask him about it because this threw me off. So far, I found myself outside. I mean, he had a creationist arguing that coral reefs don't grow; they are placed there.
Aha!
That's an argument I've never heard anyone make.
I've also never seen that one.
So I'll have to ask Arn about that. But yeah, that's a level of stupidity that you probably don't know what a coral reef is.
Yeah, that's kind of impressive, honestly, because like every creationist argues the coral reefs like formed during the flood, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for this guy to be like, no, coral reefs just don't form at all. Like,
No, they were placed.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
I don't know who
placed.
placed them there, how they placed them there, and what they're made of.
It was Adam. Adam placed them there.
I want to have a conversation with this guy. I mean, just to pick his, pick his brain would be really, really weird to say. To pick whatever he has instead of a brain.
The like battery that's up there or something.
I have no clue. Okay, continue. We're about a little over halfway in. So,
oh Lord.
Yeah, so we're not going to make it through, I think.
Oh well.
But we'll see.
That's okay.
Darwin did eventually turn to the species question and began trying to accumulate evidence for it. This involved running various experiments. Chapter 3
Wait, I
focuses
thought Darwin
on
didn't
this
have
side of
empirical
Darwin.
evidence.
He had little formal training in science, his only university degree being the General Bachelor of Arts degree from Cambridge.
Sure.
Did it show in the way he conducted his experiments? What kinds of experiments did he run? And what did he think about the results?
Okay.
Do his letters describing these efforts suggest the competence of a professional experimenter? Or is the portrait that emerges more that of a plucky amateur? And if the latter, what light does this shed on the origin? Chapters 4 and 5 focus on the writing and publishing.
Pause for a second. Okay, so a plucky amateur wrote one of the most significant works of biology in the past, in the history of human existence. Just a plucky amateur. Okay, sure. I mean, it's true that Darwin really didn't have much in the way of formal science education because, after all, basically for Darwin, if you're like a gentleman in England at the time that Darwin lived, basically your options were go into the medical field or get a theology degree. Darwin could not stand the sight of blood, so medicine was out, and theology was boring. I kind of sympathize with that. So he turned to naturalism, right? He turned to studying the natural world. He joined a club that and studied beetles or something like that. And then he met, I think it was Sedgwick, who was like, here, I have this opportunity for you. You might like it, which eventually was the beagle and all that. But he did have some training. You would say he had informal training prior to getting on the beagle, where he briefly and sort of informally learned about geology and botany and zoology. But yeah, it's true in the sense that he did not have a true formal degree in natural natural sciences, whatever. But did he need it? I guess he didn't because he wrote he wrote Voyage of the Beagle, which was his journal, which is a very widely read book. He wrote Origin of Species. He wrote The Descent of Man. He wrote a bunch of books. He wrote a book on the geology of South America. He wrote a book on the fertilization of orchids, on the formation of coral reefs. He wrote a book on the artificial selection of livestock and the actions of earthworms, and he wrote books on botany. So and barnacles, his master work before he wrote Origin was on the diversity and anatomy of barnacles, a book or a series of books that were referenced for decades later, even after he died. So if you want to make the argument that he was just a plucky amateur, you really gotta hand it to him, because he guessed to right every single time, I guess. I don't know. Not every single time, of course. I'm being hyperbolic there. But, you have to argue that for all the really important stuff, he just happened to guess correctly, I suppose. Because I don't know how else to explain that. Peter, what do you think?
I mean, so I'm just thinking. I had a flashback. I once was a plucky amateur, and I still am. I think at least that's how I consider myself. I got an invitation from TZ Myers to join one of his streams because he wanted someone there who wasn't involved in biology or science and this was after I met PZ on one of your streams. And so I think that at times a plucky amateur can have a completely different view, a new view of something, and can come up with new findings. And keep in mind that the plucky amateur you're talking about was someone who was already working in that field while being an amateur, but he did his research. So yeah, I mean, a plucky amateur can become a great scientist. That's pretty much how all scientists start out, being plucky amateurs and then discovering this is what we want to do, and then study more and more and becoming a scientist in the field. That's literally how it works.
Yeah, absolutely.
The sad part is that a plucky amateur is narrating this entire stream without doing any research. That's what bothers me most. If you're a plucky amateur, how can you criticize a scientist like Darwin? If you're a plucky amateur, how can you criticize the theory of evolution without having studied it? You're basically...
Well, obviously, you don't need to study evolution. You just need to study theology, and then just write a book about evolution. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Yes, that's basically it. I mean, never mind. Okay, continue.
Yes.
Of the origin and the responses to the book. What was Darwin's thought process as he wrote his abstract? Why did he encourage his readers to view it only as an abstract? How did people respond to the book? How did Darwin respond to his critics? And just how confident was Darwin that he had solved the problem of the origin of species? Chapter 6 turns to Darwin's big book.
He wasn't confident at all before he published it, as far as I know. He talked to several people and said, "This is what I found. Should I put this in my book? And do you think I'm onto something?" So he did check everything out before he published the book, which is it's a good thing to just talk to people and say, "Hey, I found this. What do you think?"
Yeah, absolutely. Stephen Jay Gould wrote in I think it was Ever Since Darwin about that very thing, Peter, that you just said, that Darwin he actually waited. Yes. He waited quite a while before publishing anything on natural selection because he had a reputation as being a very diligent scientist. He actually kind of returned from the Beagle voyage as kind of a celebrity scientist just by that point. And then following his books on the geology of South America, the work on coral reefs, the voyage of the Beagle, after he wrote those books and then his work on barnacles, he was already very well known and respected among scientific circles. So...
Sorry, I had a laugh. Icarus wrote, "Darwin had a wife. Is that biblically correct?" I found that funny.
I mean, you're supposed to get to know your wife biblically, aren't you? I don't know.
Yeah, but Jesus didn't have a wife, right? So
his barnacle book was a graphic novel, of course, obviously. I don't know. It just seems really funny to me that Darwin had this reputation already as being this very diligent and hardworking scientist. So, and he respected and cherished that authority so much that he was nervous about publishing his natural selection work because he was afraid of, I don't know about, maybe not afraid is the right word. He was concerned about the hornet's nest that he was kicking in staunchly religious Victorian England. He was concerned about that. which is also why he didn't even talk about human evolution and origin of species.
Yeah, if you consider the time, that would have ruffled some feathers if you came up with a theory like that.
Right.
Because basically everyone thought, okay, man was created especially in the image of God, so we couldn't have evolved. Not possible.
Right.
Back then, I think that was a tougher thing to combat than it is today. Far tougher.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah.
Darwin drafted most of it, repeatedly promising that he would finish and publish it, but ultimately declined to do so. Happily for contemporary scholars, the unfinished manuscript was published a century later. The work has received surprisingly little attention, given that it is Darwin's big promised book. After all, it was supposed to provide the crucial evidence for the miraculous creative powers of natural selection, evidence that he conceded was largely absent from his mere abstract. In this chapter, we will give it the attention it deserves, exploring the question of why Darwin left it unfinished and unpublished, and see what the book can teach us about Darwin the man and his theory of evolution.
Here, pause for a moment.
Chapter 7 turns to...
Okay, so I'll try to make this very simple, if it's not like already apparently obvious. Imagine that you're writing a book, or a movie script or something. You're writing it down. You feel you're liking it. It's really big. It's your magnum opus, etc. And then you find out somebody else has a similar idea to you. Now you don't have time to finish this work or turn all of it into like one singular body of work. So you have to make instead a much simplified version that you can publish, right? And then once you've done that, you can then edit that later after you published it. You can make subsequent editions of it, but you just want to put something out there before you get scooped. Now, once you've already put something out there, it is now easier to just fix the thing you've already published instead of going back and trying to finish your unfinished longer work, because you've already gotten published. This thing you've put together has already been deemed good enough for publication. So just change that. Why would you go back and try changing the thing that has not been deemed good enough for publication yet? I don't know. It just seems like Darwin took the more sensical and logical option there of the two. It could just be me.
I mean, it's like the Constitution of the United States, right? It got published, and then you got amendments.
Yeah. No, Peter, we have to write an entirely new Constitution every time we want to amend it.
Yeah, and we should have mentioned the amendments in the first Constitution ever published, because obviously, wouldn't that invalidate the right to bear arms because it wasn't mentioned originally? Ooh, that's going to ruffle a few feathers, don't you think? Ooh,
yeah, maybe a few.
The curious fact that Darwin, immediately after publishing The Origin, immersed himself in the study of orchids and the many ways they were structured to ensure their cross-fertilization by insects. The readers of The Origin were awaiting the appearance of Darwin's promised big book on natural selection so that they could better evaluate the arguments presented in Darwin's abstract. So why did Darwin put aside the big book and turn to botany?
I don't really understand that argument.
Something he referred to as a mere hobby horse. I have suggested an answer above, but there is much more to be said on the matter. In a final chapter, I will consider several ways that Darwinian mythology obscures other aspects of Darwin and his work. For example, while it is true that Darwin came from abolitionist roots and himself detested slavery, what were his real views on race and racism? To what extent, if any, was Darwin himself partly responsible?
Do we have to address this? Because...
Wait, I wanted to hear what the end of that sentence was. What is he responsible for?
For the development of later scientific racism and the eugenics movement that drew on his work. Likewise, what about his views on gender roles?
Oh, come on. Really? They had to. Peter, they couldn't help themselves. A creationist cannot write a book about Darwin without mentioning the racism stuff. Like they can't help themselves. Remember, the point of this book is to compare Darwin's big unfinished natural selection book with Origin of Species. Origin of Species has nothing at all to do with human evolution, and I'm willing to bet neither does the natural selection book. So it's just like out of left field that they're like, yeah, we know Darwin opposed slavery, but he was racist. It's like, come on. Come on.
And the Dutch still are.
No.
We have dog races.
Darwin had...
We still use the word race when it comes to dogs. When it comes to other animals, we still use that word. And so this might even be why a lot of these young Earth creationists like the King James version, because instead of using the word slave, they use the word bondservant, which sounds a lot nicer, doesn't it? It doesn't have the...
It sure does.
Yeah. So...
hold on. Alex Markel, you asked a really good question, and I have a paper on it if I can find it. Let me see if I can find that paper. Oh, where is it? There's a... Oh, here it is. I found it. Alex Markel says, can we get some statistics on racism and adherence to pseudoscience beliefs? Here's a paper that was published in 2022. It's titled Bigotry and the Human-Animal Divide, Disbelief in Human Evolution and Bigoted Attitudes Across Different Cultures. Now, here's the abstract. Quote, the current investigation tested if people's basic belief in the notion that human beings have developed from other animals can predict human-to-human prejudice and intergroup hostility. Using data from the American General Social Survey and Pew Research Center, and from 3 online samples, we tested this hypothesis across 45 countries in diverse populations and religious settings across time in nationally representative data, and with more comprehensive measures in online crowdsourced data. Supporting the hypothesis, low belief in human evolution was associated with higher levels of prejudice, racist attitudes, and support for discriminatory behaviors against lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, blacks, and immigrants in the United States, with higher in-group biases, prejudicial attitudes towards outgroups, and less support for conflict resolution in samples collected from 19 Eastern European countries, 25 Muslim countries, and Israel. Further, among Americans, lower belief in evolution was associated with greater prejudice and militaristic attitudes towards political outgroups. Finally, perceived similarity to animals, a construct distinct from belief in evolution, partially mediated the link between belief in evolution and prejudice, even when controlling for religious beliefs, political views, and other demographic variables, and were also observed for non-dominant groups, like religious and racial minorities. Overall, these findings highlight the importance of belief in human evolution as a potentially key individual difference variable predicting racism and prejudice. So, there you have it.
Can you put the link to that in the chat?
Yep, give me 1 second.
Because
I gotta jump.
I really want
to put it in our side chat here, Peter? Here, I'll put it in our side chat if you want to toss it down there in the...
Yeah.
There you go.
Because I really want to... First of all, I want to read the entire thing. I think a lot of people would want to read it too, so There's the link.
Yep.
It's in the chat now too.
Smitty's correct. Racism is a pseudoscience belief. That's very true. So yeah, that paper is super cool. You might have to not do Sci-Hub to get the full paper for it, though. I don't know. Anyway, so I just thought that was really neat and not at all surprising that that there's that very clear similarity between or connection, I should say. Sorry, there's that very clear connection between racism and outgroup prejudice and being a creationist. Who would have thunk it? You know, who could have seen this coming? Not me, that's for sure. We're all shocked, I tell you, to find that there's gambling in this establishment.
It does line up with my experiences on different platforms of social media.
Oh, well, DM Fragmentary Changes Wing. The boosting separate creation for the races. Well, that was very common in Darwin's day, and Darwin actually tackled and destroyed that idea in Descent of Man. So that's called polygenism, which is the belief that the human races were created separately. Darwin was a monogenist, which means that all human races share a common ancestor. Which Darwin forcefully argued that they do, or did, I guess. They do currently share a common ancestor that lived in the past. So, yeah. Which is also why it's really funny nowadays that creationists are like, well, actually, creation always said that there was only one human race. That's not true. That simply is false, and that's been false. I mean, go look at Louis Agassiz in the mid 1800s. He was obviously arguing against that. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing a show with Arne on the Book of Mormon. If you want to read what some Christians had to say about racism, that book is inherently racist. I mean, being black.
They argue that
being black was a punishment from God.
Right? Yeah. I do remember that. That's what I was going to ask about.
Yes.
Yeah. Isn't it like the mark of, the mark of Cain or something like that?
Yeah, something like that. But so yeah, they were the lesser people, and for a long time they weren't even allowed in church. So yeah,
right. Yeah,
there they couldn't
be priests or whatever. Yeah.
No, they couldn't even attend.
They couldn't even attend. Couldn't be priests. Yeah. So that's cool. We love that.
Yeah, Smitty said the curse of Ham.
Curse of Ham, yeah.
Which has a different connotation these days. It's the curse of Ham.
Curse of Ham is what happens at the end of November.
So. Well, the curse of Ham these days is being a creationist and not being able to think. It's the curse of Ham.
Yeah.
Depending on how you look at it.
You know, the funny thing is, Ken Ham has picked his successor to AIG, and it's not Bodhi Hodge. I'm sure Bodhi is seething about that.
Yeah.
But the guy who's going to be inheriting AIG is even crazier than Ken Ham is.
Go figure.
He's even more like insane and evil than Ken Ham. So, you know.
So Bodhi wasn't crazy enough?
Yeah, well, I think Bodhi's just stupid. I think even Ken Ham was like, yeah, Bodhi can't handle the family business. We got to pick somebody else.
Well, Bodhi's mostly a parrot. So if the human that he's parroting is falling away, he has nothing to parrot. And then he has to come up with his own things. And yeah, I think Ken Ham may have made the smart move to not put him there.
Yeah, he does, correct things every once in a while. Bodhi's very funny because when I went on Apologia's channel back in was it 2018? I think way back when I went on his channel, the thing that was so crazy about it so we watched an AIG one of their news videos. And Bodhi Hodge says, "Oh, people make fun of us for saying that there's a talking snake in the Bible. That's the emotive language fallacy." And it's like, but wait, Bodhi, you believe that there's a talking snake in Genesis? What do you mean?
Mm-hmm.
How is First of all, is the emotive language fallacy even a thing? Like, I don't even know what that means. But also, you believe that. You objectively believe that there's a talking snake in Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get it. I don't understand. What do you mean?
Yeah, but God did that, Jackson.
Silly.
God made the snake talk. I've heard people say, which is kind of weird because the same people think that the snake was the devil and shouldn't have said nothing, but God made him talk. So
yeah,
I guess don't think things through, these creationists.
That's true. I guess we can pull back to the big screen that has us on it.
Okay. There we go.
But yeah, we got about 4 minutes. So I was just gonna say, oh, there you go, RJ. Yeah, pulled the reference for it. Yeah. So yeah, I recommend that. It's a really neat paper. So go read it. I mean, not super surprising. I read a paper on the link between evangelicals and QAnon not too long ago, which was another fascinating thing because there are lots of similarities between like QAnon end times prophesying and like evangelical prophesying and the QAnon like the mythology they've kind of built up. Like, for instance, in evangelicalism you have like, you know, the good and evil, and you have, you know, there will be like a last battle between it, and you have one person who embodies the good and one person who embodies the evil. And it's like, these are all things that you could also reasonably ascribe to like QAnon. You could say like, oh, well, Donald Trump is the good and the Republican Party, you know, embodies the good, and Biden and the Democrats are the evil, you know, and so he has to defeat them. And there's the paper went into it much more deeply and talked about all these different ideas, but it's like, yeah, there's a lot of similarity, a lot of overlap, which makes sense then why evangelicals, for instance, are so quick to glom onto QAnon silliness. So yeah.
Want to point out one more comment. Volander Gingerson says he's Bodhi dodged at this point. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, true.
Ken Ham did the Bodhi dodge.
The Bodhi dodge. Yeah, RJ and I, when we wrote Rocks for Their Volume 1 in chapter, I think it was chapter 5, where we talk about the strangeness of kinds, Bodhi and Georgia Purdom co-wrote this chapter. I don't think Georgia wrote it at all because it says some hilariously stupid stuff that even she knows is wrong. Like it says, the evidence, you know, there's no evidence that dogs and cats share a common ancestor because there are no dog-cat hybrids in the fossil record. And it's like, I don't believe Georgia Purdom wrote this. I think Bodhi wrote it because he's stupid. And yep, exactly. And then, you know, they just kind of slapped her name on it just to give it some credibility. So
it's possible. It's possible. Although I have heard her say some very stupid things too. I mean,
oh sure, that's true. Smitty's killing me here. Christians barely own chattel slaves anymore. They've been corrupted by woke ideology. That's like that. Peter, you've probably seen it. That meme. That's like atheists are more likely to own cats than Christians, and someone comments, "Isn't owning other people illegal?" You know?
Yeah.
I love that meme. It makes me laugh. I think it's very funny.
Also, as someone who has a dog, I need to point out that you do not own a cat. The cat owns you. You're there to provide food and shelter, and other than that, you do not bother the cat. The cat does his own thing. You're there to serve.
Mm-hmm. True. Alrighty. Well, we are at the 2-hour mark. So, Peter, thank you so much for hosting as always. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure as always. I mean, this is fun. This is one of the things where I always come to just have fun. And It usually is.
I have fun too.
Thank you for picking out these videos, because that's the hard part. What do you tackle this week? Because while you're spoiled for choice, you need to figure out stuff that is at least kind of interesting, I guess, and that's the hard part. Picking a creationist video is easy. Picking a good creationist video to pick apart is the hard part.
Yeah, there's just so many.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, well, and thank you everybody in the live chat who watched today. I really appreciate all of you, and we will see all of you next week.
See you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.